I live in Virginia, pretty close to where the Appalachian Trail is. I've walked on the trail several times before, but there are also a lot of other trails nearby where I live, as the land is very unique. There are lots of mountains and woods, and my apartment is right by them. For a stretch of time a couple of years ago, I would often jog on the trails at my place. I would go almost every day. Basically, from the apartment complex, there was already a trail that connected from it and would go a ways down, and then connected with a bunch of other trails that went in the woods. These trails went for miles, some of which connected to parks and such. Most of the time, they would be pretty quiet, but occasionally a decent amount of people would use them. For example, if it was really nice weather on a weekend, there might be a good amount of traffic on the trails. But just based on my work schedule and my personal preferences, I would typically jog on these trails really early in the morning. Normally, I would go there at about 5 a.m., and I would jog for maybe about an hour or so. Most of the time when I jogged, I would have my headphones in and listen to music. There would also typically be nobody else on the trails at that hour, as it would still be dark outside. And this is something that sort of made me a little nervous at first, but I quickly got used to it. I would jog maybe 5 miles on these various trails for roughly an hour, and then head back to my apartment. So one morning, I was jogging on the trails like usual. It was very early and still dark out, and I was heading back but still maybe a mile from my apartment. As I was in the woods jogging on the trail, my headphones died. I had forgotten to charge them, and so as I was running, I took them out. I continued to jog, now listening to the silence of my surroundings. The only noises that I heard were occasional birds chirping in the distance, or leaves from the trees lightly blowing in the wind. About 5 minutes into the silent jogging, I heard something else. I started to hear footsteps behind me a ways. This instantly was strange because I hadn't seen anybody else in my times jogging in the morning, basically ever. As I continued jogging, I heard the footsteps jogging a ways back. I didn't look at that point, but I had to figure that they were between 50 and 100 feet away. Where had they been before that I had not heard them? After jogging for a bit longer, I just decided to look and see who was there. When I turned and looked behind me, I saw someone a long ways back, but they instantly ducked into the woods. This was really suspicious. I couldn't tell anything about them because it was dark out and they were a long ways away. But why jump into the thick forest? This made me really suspicious now, and I started to jog faster back towards my apartment. I was getting a lot closer to it now, but still had a ways to go. After some time, I heard the person running on the trail again behind me. I just wanted to get out of there as quick as possible. I was now pretty close, and I basically started sprinting. A short time later, I made it to another trail and then took a left to go back home. After running down that path for a short time, I came out of the woods and was basically back. I still heard the footsteps until I left the woods, then I stopped hearing them. I didn't look back again until I was almost at my building. By that point, I didn't see anyone. Whoever had been there was gone. I think they stayed in the woods. I was able to get inside and was safe. I wasn't sure exactly what happened there, but it was really strange. A few days went by, and I soon forgot about what had happened mostly. So without really thinking much, I got up early again and decided to go for another jog. I went outside and entered the woods. It was at that point when I remembered the events of my previous time. I thought about going back inside, but I convinced myself to keep going. I told myself there was probably just a one-time thing, and maybe there was an honest explanation anyways, so I started jogging. But I decided to keep my eyes out for anything suspicious, and also jog with only one headphone in. So about 20 minutes or so into jogging that morning, I was in the woods on the path by myself. However, all of a sudden, I suddenly saw something off the trail to my right in the woods. There was what looked like a man, and he was kind of crouched behind a tree and was looking at me. He was wearing camouflage, it looked like, and it was a miracle that I even saw him, because he was hidden pretty good. I started to pass him, but then instantly stopped and turned around to go back. It was kind of just a reaction, as I didn't really give it too much thought. The man didn't move. I then began jogging back towards my apartment. Not long after, I heard movement just in the woods behind me, and then footsteps on the path. Then I heard some jogging. I knew that it was the same guy, so I started jogging faster. I could run for a long time without getting tired from all my experience, which is an advantage that I had. I continued to hear the jogging a long ways back again, but I didn't look behind me. I just hoped that he wouldn't get any closer. Eventually, I made it to the other trail and then went out of the woods again. Once more, the man did not leave the woods. I looked back and he was still there. I got back to my apartment and then didn't go jogging on that trail in the dark again. I've been back in that woods to do some jogging or walking since then, but not as much, and when I do, I go during daylight. Other than that, I do most of my jogging on the treadmill now. I'm not sure what that man's plans were or what explanation there could possibly be for his behavior, but it was really suspicious. I work at a Walmart that is located in Pennsylvania, and I've worked here for several years. One time, I had a pretty crazy encounter that I will never forget. So, I was working as a cashier, and I was working until 10 o'clock that night. At one point during my shift, a man came into my checkout line. I don't remember what he bought, but it wasn't much. The man looked fairly average to me. He had glasses, a bit of a beard, and was wearing a hat. As he was standing across from me, we made some basic conversation as people do at the checkout line. The man then asked me if I could take him to the Appalachian Trail. Now, the Walmart that I work at is located not too far away from it, and it's maybe a 10-minute drive or less. I don't know exactly how to get there, but I knew the basic direction, and some roads that you would go on to get there, so I told the guy what I knew. He then said, "No, can you take me to the Appalachian Trail?" He was sort of smiling when he said it, so I couldn't really tell if he was joking or not, but I just assumed that he must have been, because it was kind of a weird question. I mean, why would he ask me to take him there? I told him, "I have like 4 more hours of work. I'm not off until 10. The man said, "Okay, then I will wait for you," and he kind of smiled when he said it. I wasn't quite sure if he was joking or not, but it seemed like he probably was, so I said, "Okay then, sounds good," and I kind of laughed as I said it. Of course, I was joking. The man then walked off and left. I continued on with work, thinking nothing of the interaction. I continued with work at the checkouts for the next few hours. That interaction with the man happened at probably like 6 p.m. or so I did have about 4 more hours of work. I continued on, and then at 10 o'clock, I was finally off. So I clocked out and then left the Walmart to walk to my car, which was parked at the back of the parking lot. After I got out the doors, I saw this guy kind of standing around near the exits just loitering. I didn't think much of it for the first couple of seconds because people do that, but then I recognized the guy as the man who I had talked to earlier. He quickly saw me and then started walking over. I couldn't believe that he was still here 4 hours later. I had said I would take him to the Appalachian Trail, but I was joking. I mean, who takes that literally? The man approached and then said that I was finally done and I could drive him now. I told him that I wasn't actually serious and I thought that he had been joking. The man said that he had waited all this time for me and that he didn't have a car. I was conflicted. I actually felt kind of bad if that was in fact the case, but that also made me even more creeped out by the guy. I started walking to my car, and the guy began walking with me. I asked him why he needed a ride to the Appalachian Trail. I mean, it was 10 o'clock at night, way too late to be doing any hiking. The man said that he was visiting town and really wanted to check it out. I told him that it was probably closed, and he said that didn't matter. I stopped and told the guy, "Look, sorry, but I don't know you. I just don't like giving rides to people that I don't know." The man said that he would then follow me in his car. I know he told me earlier that he didn't have a car, but I didn't question him. The compromise seemed good enough to me. I just didn't want the guy in my car. I'm not sure if he didn't have phone directions or what. I was done asking him questions. I said, "All right, I will drive to the Appalachian Trail and you can follow me." So I went to my car and he went and got in his. I put in directions because I wasn't even completely sure myself how to get there. It was less than a 10-minute drive, so we left and the guy followed me. It was really quiet at that hour and it was just our 2 cars on the quiet roads. So I made it to the trail and a small parking lot. I parked and the man parked next to me. He got out of his car and I rolled down my window to say bye to him. The man walked quickly right up to my window and said thanks, but then he told me that he needed me to get out and show him where the trail started. I pointed off in the direction and told him. I was also very curious as to why he was here so late at night, but he said no, I had to get out and show him. This was far too sketchy, and I said no, I have to go now. The man tried opening my door handle, which thank God was locked. I then instinctively hit the gas to back up and leave. The guy basically started chasing after my car. I was able to get away from him though, and I quickly left and began driving back home. I thought that the man might go back to his car and try following me, so I started turning at a bunch of random roads. Then I drove the rest of the way back home and thankfully didn't see the guy. I'm not sure if he came after me in his car or not, but it was crazy. Why did he want to go to the Appalachian Trail, and why did he want me to go there so badly? A few years ago, I took a trip to the Appalachian Trail with my best friend Paige. We were on a road trip, and we had gone on a road trip to another part of the country the previous year. It's always a lot of fun to travel and see the different cool places. We were planning to do a good amount of hiking. We went to the trail and walked for hours. On this particular day, we did not see anybody else on the trail the entire time. It was peaceful and quiet, and we both really enjoyed the hike. However, I remember that after being out for hours, we finally got back to the car. It was parked in a small lot that had maybe 10 or 15 parking spaces in it total. But yet there was a car that was parked directly next to ours. It was an old beat-up car that was kind of small, and it had blankets over some of the windows. I found this really odd, because there were plenty of other spaces. We both went to our car and got inside, and in doing so, realized that somebody was in the driver's seat of the car next to us. A man sat behind the wheel, but I just started our car and we began to drive off. That's when the man started his car, which had a really loud engine, and then he started driving behind us. Instantly, we were suspicious. I mean, what were we supposed to think? When we got out onto the road, the man continued to follow. So we decided to try to drive to a busy place to maybe lose him. We got off that quiet road, went to another one, and soon we found this spot that was a busier part of the city. There was much more traffic and a bunch of businesses, things like stores and restaurants. We drove there with the guy still following, but here it was definitely more difficult for him to do so. We turned into a few random businesses and went down some roads nearby. The man was able to mostly keep up with us until we got to this four-way stop. It was kind of busy with cars coming in all directions. We went straight, and the guy behind us had to wait for the other cars to cross the road. But as soon as we got across, we turned again and went behind this store. We then drove back there and turned again, and had completely lost the guy because he had been held up in traffic. We were both very alarmed by the situation, but we were glad to now be on our way without being followed. We continued back to the hotel at that point. After getting back, we were hanging out in our room and it was nighttime. A few hours later, Paige noticed out the window that the car was in the parking lot. I went out to the window to look, and she was right. The same car was in the parking lot. We had a good view as our room was on the 4th floor, so we could see many cars in the lot. Had he been following us still after we thought we had lost him? We kept watching his car, and it sort of looked like he was inside of it, but we couldn't tell for certain. I just hoped that he wasn't staying at the hotel with us. The next morning, we had to check out of the hotel and leave. But the guy was still there, and when we looked now in daylight from our room, it appeared as though he was inside of it. We waited for a while and then decided to leave. We packed up our stuff and went to the front desk. However, before leaving, we told the employee at the front desk about the guy in his car and mentioned how he had followed us. The man at the desk said he would go and check on the man to see what he was doing. He walked out there, but before he even got to the guy's window, the man drove away. So after that, we carefully left. Thankfully, we didn't see the man for the rest of the trip, but that was really creepy. I lived in Appalachia for about a year for work. It was cool to live in a small house by myself not too far from the Appalachian Trail. The landscape over there is much different than what I'm used to and what I grew up with. Lots of hills and trees, and it would get really foggy a lot where I was. It looked kind of spooky sometimes, and I had heard some scary stories, but overall nothing creepy ever happened and I enjoyed it. Until one night. In the house that I was renting, it was a quiet neighborhood, and it had a front and backyard. A little ways past my backyard, there was a trail that went to a wooded area. I always meant to check it out and go jogging or walking there sometime. However, for like the first 6 months or so, I never got around to it. Finally, one evening, it had already just gotten dark out, but I found myself out in the backyard. I think I had just taken out the trash or something, so I was already outside. I was just curious and decided to go walk over to the trail, just to see what the path was looking like. I didn't have intentions to go for a walk or go far on that night, but maybe if it looked good, I would go the next morning. So I walked out past my yard and got to the trail. Now, I remember I was told when I got the place that anybody could use the trail and that it was not private property or anything. So I entered it and took a few steps down. It was really dark now, and it had no lighting on the trail, but it looked like it was a pretty good trail for walking or whatever. It was mostly surrounded by woods. I got maybe 20 feet down the trail and was just standing there looking around. Then I heard a sound. Someone said, "Hey." It was like they were greeting me, saying hi, but I couldn't tell where they were. Maybe in the woods? I looked around at all angles, but couldn't figure it out. Then they said it again. It was sort of quiet, but it sounded like a man. I answered and said, "Hi, who's there?" Nobody answered. After a few seconds, they said, "Hey," again. I was creeped out now, so I turned around and just walked out of there rather quickly and to my backyard. I went all the way back to my house and went inside. Something about that just seemed really creepy. I mean, where was the person? Who were they? And why did they not answer me? I know they could hear me, and it seemed as though they were in the middle of the woods. I thought that maybe I would still go walking on the trail the following morning. However, that night I was awoken at 2 o'clock in the morning. The first thing I heard was somebody knocking at my front door. I got up and left my bedroom and went to a window to look out. I saw that there was someone there. It looked like a man, but I couldn't see many details. It was really dark and he was wearing a black rain jacket with a hood. He knocked again. I wasn't going to answer. He then walked off and I saw him go around my house. He then walked through my backyard and off towards the woods. Could that be the same person? Needless to say, I didn't go walking on that trail in the woods the next morning, or ever. Nothing like that ever happened again in my time living there, though. This happened 2 years ago. I was driving down the road near the Appalachian Trail. I live not too far away, and I work in the area as well. In fact, I was driving home from work late one night. It was a quiet and sort of winding road that I was on. There were literally no other cars out at all, as it was nearly midnight. It was a relaxing drive until I came upon what looked like a car that was parked in the middle of the road up ahead. The car was in my lane, and it was completely stopped. The road I was on was just 2 lanes, one for each direction of traffic, and there was a very small shoulder, and then it was just grass and the woods, so there really wasn't a whole lot of space. But there was enough space for the car to have pulled over and be off the road if he wanted to. So as I approached the car, I slowed down significantly. I was confused because the car did have its brake lights on, so it appeared to be running. However, it did not have its hazards on, and it was completely blocking my lane. As I was now going slow, I approached it even closer, and I figured that I would go into the other lane to pass it. Whoever was driving the car was still inside of it. As I turned to the left and began to change lanes, the car then moved and started going forward, but it immediately turned to the left and was now starting to block the lane that I was driving to. I slowed down even more and then came to a stop, probably about 20 yards away. At first, I thought maybe the person driving the car was trying to get out of my way, but they had just gone in the wrong direction. But then the car just stopped, now about halfway in one lane and halfway in the other, and nearly completely sideways. I was thinking that this person must be one of the worst drivers ever. I had not enough space to go around them in either lane now, so I waited, but they didn't move. I could see the driver a little bit now. It was a man who looked over at me, but he didn't really have any expression on his face, although I couldn't see him very well. After sitting there for probably 30 seconds, I decided to proceed forward and to still try to go around him to the left. I could just barely make it if I went partly on the small shoulder. When I went forward though, he once more moved. This time he went forward more, now completely blocking my path again. Now I thought that he might be trying to purposely block me. But why? I backed up and tried to go around him the other way, and then he backed up. This angered me, but I also got suspicious and a little bit creeped out. I honked and wondered if he would let me get by, but he just stopped his car there, completely blocking me. I rolled down my window and shouted at him, asking what he was doing. I know that he had to have heard me, as it was a really quiet night, but he didn't respond at all. He said nothing and still didn't move. I tried one last effort to go around, but he then backed up more and blocked my way again. So I figured that I had better leave and find a different way. So I backed up more, made a U-turn, and then went the other way. I had to take a longer route home, but eventually made it there maybe 10 minutes later than I would have. Since then, nothing like that has happened over there. But I still wonder what that man's intentions were. Why was he blocking me? Was he hoping that I would get out of the car? I'm not sure, but I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. I grew up in the backwoods of Appalachia. My family lived on a 5-acre plot of land, and more than half of the property was covered by dense forest that expanded past our property line for miles. My entire childhood was spent in those woods with my brother, climbing trees and catching frogs in the ponds. It was everything 2 boys could ask for. One late summer night, when my twin and I were about 8 years old, I heard someone screaming outside far off in the woods. I was the only one to hear it because I had my window open. It scared me to my core. I've heard screams before, but they were from coyotes. This was different. I went to my brother's room and opened the window to see if he could hear it as well. Sure enough, he did. Not wanting to bother our parents, we decided not to say anything. After about a week of these screams, we decided to tell our parents. Our parents told us it was probably coyotes and there was nothing to be afraid of. The screams every day sounded like they were getting closer to our house though, and then outdoor toys went missing. I wasn't able to find my skateboard I left outside one night. My brother's bike was taken, and our favorite pool inflatables were gone. We told our parents again about the screams and about our toys now being gone. Of course, they said that the screams were coyotes and that our stuff went missing because we didn't take care of them and probably got lost. The screams were getting so loud though and sounding so close that I stopped sleeping with my window open. But there was one night that I could hear yelling that sounded closer than ever before. I peered out the window, and what I saw sent shivers down my spine and paralyzed me with fear. Just outside my second-floor bedroom window that looked over the backyard into the edge of the woods, I saw the figure of a slender person. Even from my window, I could see the moonlight reflecting off the whites of their eyes, large and bulging out of the sockets. The eyes fixed on the house, unmoving. It was a man who stood a foot taller than the tall wooden fence that separated the backyard from the trees. His gaze slowly shifted towards my window. He caught sight of me, and he slowly made his way across the fence to the gate. He got close enough for me to see his face clearly now. His mouth was wide open with an expression of surprise on his face because of just how much his eyes bulged from his sockets. He had a head decorated with tufts of hair. Most of his scalp was bare, as it seemed as though his hair had been pulled out. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and he wasn't wearing any shoes. He stepped right under my window and stared up at me. I'm not sure how long we stared at each other. It felt like minutes. I was frozen in fear until a blood-curdling scream came from the face that was still unmoving and unblinking. That broke hold of my body, and I jumped back from the window and ran straight to my brother's room. He had heard it as well, and we busted into our parents' room screaming and crying. They assumed I had had a bad nightmare and scared my brother. No matter how much I pleaded, they still wouldn't believe me. The last week of summer was the worst of them all. The man with the bulging eyes would stare at me from the tree line at night. Every once in a while I would see him during the day, but every time I yelled for someone to come over, he would disappear. When school started up, I was relieved to not be home all the time. It was a stressful time. I started hearing and seeing the man less. I started to think that maybe it was my imagination that created this image and that my parents might have been right. However, one late Tuesday night, there was a knock at the front door. My father answered the door and greeted a cop. The cop explained that the neighbors called 911 on someone breaking into their pool house. The officer told my father that the man had been living in the woods for a few months, and that if anything went missing over the summer, then it might have been found at the camp the intruder had set up. I went to the back door to catch a glimpse of the man that broke into the neighbor's property. When I got close enough to the cop's car window to peer inside, a face slowly inched closer to the other side of the glass. The eyes were bright white and bulging, mouth ajar, and tufts of hair became visible. It was the screaming man from the summer. I was glad that I didn't have to worry about him anymore, but with his hideout being in the woods where my brother and I played, I wondered how many times we had been out near this strange man without knowing it. I've worked on the railroad for quite some time now. This story happened when I was working on the 150-mile line between Nashville and Chattanooga in Tennessee, right on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains. I was working a local job on that run called the Cohen Pusher. We would sit in our shop with our locomotive, and when a train needed help, we would attach to the back end to help them. With the mountain grade starting at Cohen and basically going all the way to Chattanooga, it would be a difficult stretch of railroad. I had the third shift, so it would always be dark out when I was working. We basically just sat in the shop and waited to be called to help heavy tonnage trains get to Sherwood, Tennessee. On one night at 11:50 p.m., a heavy freight train stopped over at Sherwood and requested our help to get to the other side of the mountain. We climbed into our locomotive and were on our way. By the time we hit South Cohen and started curving up the foot of the mountain, we had no visibility of anything that wasn't illuminated by the locomotive light. We had a 30-minute ride ahead of us, along with a 2-mile-long dark tunnel in our path. As the clock struck midnight, we were now in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a dark forest filled with animals, but very few mountain folk lived out there. About 10 minutes later, the north portal of the tunnel was in sight. A bridge overhung the entrance, a track that was taken up long ago as it crossed going to another part of the mountains, but the bridge stayed and was still accessible by ATV. As I looked up, I saw a campfire and people. They all looked to be dressed darkly, maybe even in masks. All I could see was white on their faces. As we started under the bridge, we heard a thud over our heads on the locomotive roof. We proceeded through the dark tunnel and slowed just out of the south portal as my conductor looked out the back door with his flashlight. He saw nothing, so we shrugged our shoulders and proceeded to the last 10 minutes to our waiting train. It was 12:20 a.m. as we coupled onto the rear of the train to push it from Sherwood. As the engineer on the head end entered the south portal of the tunnel, he radioed back to me talking about figures standing over the tunnel entrance. However, no one was there as it came to my side. As we left the north portal, I looked to the best I could see on my side of the tracks for whatever had hit our roof. I saw what looked like a black cloak fluttering in the wind as we passed by, but I couldn't really tell. As we entered Cohen, we uncoupled on the fly, and the train continued to Nashville. We cruised into our parking track and tied our engines down. As we got off, we had the feeling of being watched, but thought nothing of it as we parked ourselves in our office chairs. We had no more work for the rest of our shift. We talked and napped on and off until about 3 a.m. We never did shake the feelings of being watched, so we stepped outside as I put a pinch of dip in my lip and my conductor lit a cigarette. As we talked with each other, we both noticed movement in the brush across the tracks. My conductor and I are big country boys who aren't scared easily. We went over to investigate. We found 3 hooded men in the bushes. I asked them, "What do you guys think you're doing here? You understand you're trespassing on railroad property, right?" The lead guy then spoke in a very gravelly tone and said, "We just want what's ours." As he said this, he motioned to the top of the locomotive. We looked to see a young man on the roof at the air horn. The young man was in nothing except underwear, and we all looked at him, and then he bolted off the roof and climbed off down to the tracks. As this happened, the figures went to chase. The lead guy then turned his head back towards us with glowing eyes that we could now see, and he gave chase along with his friends. We called the police. After hours of investigation, they found the man's underwear, but no traces of him or the cloaked individuals. We even took them up the mountain on train, but there was nothing. Now, on occasion, we find mutilated dead animals by the shop door or locomotive. I've even found 1 or 2 at my door at home. We still occasionally see the same fire on the bridge and get the feeling of being watched, but it's all gone by the time we return. There's for sure some kind of cult somewhere in that mountain, and I hope that we never run into them again while we're working. It was August a few years before COVID, and I was 15 at the time. My mom lived in a cute town in the North Carolina mountains, and it was deep in southern Appalachia. My parents had been separated for a few years, and I spent the summers alone with my mom in the mountains. My mom is physically disabled, and while she's perfectly self-sufficient, groundskeeping and outdoor yard work was not a possibility for her, so I was there to help. It was a nice neighborhood, and there were neighbors close to us on either side, and a domestic road right in front of our house. We still lived in a rural area, but there was at least other people around us. This story starts when my mom was complaining about hearing scraping on the sides of the house at night. I went outside with my friend next door and we examined the problem. Parts of the paneling of the house had clearly been ripped off. There are tons of animals in Appalachia which could have done that, but we still wanted to know. My friend had an extra doorbell camera that kind of captures motion. We set it up on my mom's window right above where the paneling had been torn off. That way we could see what size animal we were dealing with, and if the animal might be hurt and need intervention from a nearby wildlife service. So a few days went by, and sure enough, I got a buzz on my phone in the middle of the night. It was the camera outside capturing motion, so I opened the app to look. It was a big bear. I couldn't see details because it was mostly from an upwards view, but I knew it was a large animal, so this needed wildlife involvement. I could see its whole body, and it looked sick. It had patches of bald spots and a really shallow face. It was scary at first, but then I was sad when I realized that the bear needed help. The next day I sent the video to my friend, showed my mom, and we called animal control. This is pretty usual for my area as there's a strong presence for wildlife rehab. A wildlife rehab officer came to our house and came inside to get the full details. He planned to trap and release the bear, which meant hopefully they would be able to check on the bear to see if it was okay and it didn't have any communicable diseases. So we talked and I showed him the video. I showed the officer the video of the bear, and I had never seen someone's face go white before. He then calmly said, "Ma'am, I think you need to call the police, because a bear's legs don't bend that way." The wildlife rehab officer said that he had never seen a creature like that before and advised us to call the cops. After we did call the police, they said there's nothing we can do unless it comes back and we can catch it. A big trap was set, but the animal never came back or was smart enough to sense a trap. This gave my mom and I a jolt of fear, and she ended up moving away a few months later anyways. I grew up in southern Tennessee, not far from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. When I was 17, I took a girl I'd been seeing up a mountain trail at dusk. It wasn't a big planned trip. We just wanted somewhere quiet to talk and be alone. The trailhead was miles from the nearest house, and by the time we got out there, the light was already starting to fade. We parked in a small gravel pull-off. Right behind the car, I stepped straight into a mud puddle. It soaked right through my shoe. I remember looking down and noticing that the water wasn't a normal dark brown. It was lighter. It was almost a tan, watered-down clay color. I nudged her and pointed it out. "That's weird," I said. She shrugged. "Probably just the dirt up here." We found the trail we wanted and started walking. We got a few hundred yards up, and the woods were quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. After a while, she grabbed my arm and said that she didn't like how the woods felt and wanted to go back to the car. We turned around and headed to the car. Once we were inside, the mood shifted. We were teenagers, alone on a mountain at dusk. It didn't take long before we stretched across the front seat and started kissing. She had her hand hanging out the open passenger's window, just resting there. That's when I felt it. It's hard to explain, but I'd felt it before. A tight, prickling feeling across my back, like when someone is standing behind you and you haven't seen them yet. I froze for a second. "Pull your hand in," I told her. She laughed. "Why?" "Just do it." She rolled her eyes but pulled inside the vehicle. I tried to shake it off, and we went back to what we were doing. A few minutes later, the feeling came back stronger this time. My shoulders tensed without me meaning to, and I reached over and rolled her window up. She asked me why I rolled it up, and I responded that I didn't know, but something was just off. However, we kept going. Then it hit me again, only this time it felt like someone had pressed a live wire between my shoulder blades. I shot upright so fast I hit my head on the roof. I started the car and pulled out of there and onto the road without another word. Gravel launched out from under the tires as we headed back down the mountain. She asked what was wrong, and the only thing I could do was respond with, "I don't know." I told her that something was wrong somewhere. I didn't know what I meant by that, I just knew I had to leave. We drove straight to my parents' house. I ran inside and checked that everyone was there and doing good. Everyone was fine, and my mom asked me why I looked pale. I told her I didn't know, and I just had a bad feeling. After a while, I calmed down. We had dinner with my family. I started to feel stupid, like I'd scared both of us over nothing. When we went back outside to my car so that I could drive her home, I opened the passenger's door for her like normal. Then I walked around the back of the car to get in my side. That's when I saw it. On the trunk near the left taillight was a handprint. It was light brown, the same color as the mud puddle. The handprints were very clear, and the fingers seemed abnormally long for a human. The handprints moved across the trunk and up over the back window. The last print was smeared near the top edge, as if whoever had made it had been leaning in, trying to see through the glass. They were heading towards the driver's side door, towards me. It felt like lightning ran through my body. I knew then what that feeling I had had on my back had been. I wasn't imagining it. Someone or something had been behind the car. We sat there for a while examining the handprints, trying to make sense of it and come up with a logical explanation. But it was the exact same weird color from the puddle, which makes me believe it happened when we were parked up on that mountain. The strange feelings I had on my back made me think that the handprints were placed while we were in the car as well. Working on the railroad, I traveled through a lot of lonesome places, including the Appalachian Mountains. There's an area just south of Nashville in Tennessee that I've passed through before, and around that area there's a legend that my coworkers always bring up when we pass through. The story is that at night around midnight you can see the light of an old-school swinging lantern with a headless corpse carrying it, walking down the tracks. The corpse of a man who was once a conductor who was decapitated after falling off a moving train. I was on a two-man crew where we would be passing through the tracks near that town. We rolled into the town at about 11:50 p.m., and out of nowhere we went into an emergency. My conductor went to walk the train to check it out, leaving me alone in the cab. After about 10 minutes, all lights went out and then came back on, and I saw a figure standing on the tracks in front of our stopped train. Thinking it was my conductor, I left my seat and went out of the cab door to see what was wrong. I got on the ground and saw nobody around anywhere. I was freaked out at this point, so I just got back on the locomotive and sat down. At this point, I looked in my rearview mirrors and saw a figure moving on my second unit behind me. I radioed to my conductor asking where he was, just to hear that he was 30 cars back from me still. I walked to the second unit to find nothing. At this point, I was frustrated and creeped out, and basically stranded in this nowhere town on a stretch of tracks in the Appalachian Mountains. I went back to the lead locomotive and a few minutes passed. I felt like I was being watched, so I turned to the left to see a corpse with no head rising out of the conductor's seat coming at me. I was frozen with fear at this point. Right as it got within a few feet of me, it just disappeared. I saw a lantern swinging, moving away from my train. My conductor happened to see it on his way back and asked me why I was outside with my lantern. I explained to him what happened as we got back on our way. It was by far the creepiest thing that happened to me on the job.